that's interesting and being pointed out is this week's Tales from Conservapedia. Stephen, what do you have for us this week?
Hello again, and welcome to the Tales from Conservapedia Lounge. Pull up a chair, pour yourself a drink. It's going to be one of those.
Are you going to be like walking into like a shadow profile?
I can't do a good. My Alfred Hitchcock is about as good as Trey's Joel Osteen.
Okay, terrible. Now go.
Anyway, so today, as I was perusing Conservapedia for hilariousness, I came across a story about a progressive group. I'm not going to name the progressive group because the Conservapedians, Conservapiddles, whatever they're called.
Conservaphiles.
Conservaphiles. What would make liberal? Anyway, commenting, and this person, this head of this progressive group, had said a prayer thanking God for abortion doctors and abortion legislation, and that abortion legislation in Iowa failed, and said it in prayer form. And that got this, I believe the website was called, it's just go to Conservapedia and that'll make you giggle. But this website did not make me giggle. So my question to you is, what's your gut reaction to that someone was thanking God for abortion clinics and abortion doctors and abortion legislation and the fact that this failed? And number two, thoughts about praying for stuff like that, because you're both either pastors or going to be pastors at some point.
Sure, and to kind of lay my cards on the table, I'm not just pastor, I am pursuing a master's in public health with a specialization in sexual and reproductive health. So I kind of come at this issue from two different directions, both as a pastor and as a, sexual health practitioner person. My gut reaction is to agree with the prayer. Thank God for abortion doctors. And specifically because they function to save women's lives. A lot of the studies and on the statistics of abortion and actually how it functions is laws against abortion don't actually stop abortions. What they do is they lead to unsafe abortions. In countries where it's illegal, abortions are still happening in large numbers. They're happening in back alleys. They're happening in, barbaric ways that are putting women at huge risk. And it's a leading killer of women worldwide. It's an epidemic. And yet, it doesn't stop just because you make them illegal. In fact, that just makes it more dangerous. And so what an abortion doctor does is, when the procedure is done in a medically qualified place, there's very little risk to it. It's not negligible, but it's one of the lesser risky invasive surgeries. We have very good kind of results out of it. The procedure is very safe. It's relatively fast. It has a very fast recovery time, especially for younger women, which is most of the people who are getting abortions. And so, thank God for abortion doctors for saving women's lives. Because regardless of the stance you take on the status of a fetus, is it a life? Is it not? And that's really what the abortion debate comes down to, is where do you draw that line at life? To me, I do draw it at some point in the pre-birth time frame, but where in the pre-birth time frame is a really difficult place to draw. And there is good biblical evidence to say it begins at conception. Like, that is a faithful reading of the biblical witness. And so I don't want to negate that. But what I'm saying is anti-abortion laws do not stop abortions. They merely push them underground and make them unsafe. And there have been horrific stories, even from this country, of women dying unnecessarily. I agree. My gut reaction is to agree with that prayer. Thank God that they're willing to stand in this controversial issue, do something that is generally, at least in every state, a touchy subject, and save people's lives.
I think for me, to talk about any discussion of abortion and being pro-choice or not pro-choice has to also address larger issues.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about fetuses. So abortion is such a complicated issue. And it comes down to access to birth control and good sex education and poverty and all kinds of different things, healthcare. So all of these huge issues, and I think what's missing from this debate on both sides is a discussion of those larger issues as well, because it's I almost want to say that the level to which it has been politicized has not reflected the complicated understanding of what's going on. And I'm with Trey. I think that my gut reaction is absolutely, and for many of the same reasons. But I think that if we're going to have a faith-based discourse around this in a responsible kind of way, we need to think about life being the whole of human life.
Well, I think you raise an interesting point, right? Very few people actually want there to have to be abortions.
Yeah.
Right.
No matter what side of the debate you're on, they're not a positive outcome.
No.
They are negating something. So what it boils down to is if anti-abortion laws don't actually stop abortion, they just make them unsafe. What does stop abortions is 4 very simple things. 1, provide care for unwed mothers. Now, the Catholics are really good at that. They have unwed mothers' homes, and they care for them, and you know, they do all they can. Fund adoptions.
That's 2.
That's 2. Fund adoptions. Catholics also do that. I have a good friend of mine that went through an adoption process through Catholic Charities, and they really make that process livable. 3, and this is the more controversial one, I understand. 3 is fund contraception.
Yeah.
Prevent the pregnancies from happening in the first place. Except, as many even mainline Protestant churches do, that occasionally sex is going to happen between unmarried individuals. It's a reality of the human condition that has existed in time immemorial. And while we can preach against that, and probably should, you can't completely eliminate it, and so you need a harm reduction strategy. And a harm reduction strategy is easy, cheap, or free access to contraception. And the 4th thing, and if your church can't be out front on contraception for doctrinal reasons, the 4th thing we all can be out in front on, and that is ending the stigma of teen pregnancy. If it ceases being a stigmatizing, socially ruining thing to be pregnant, as in without being married or being young and pregnant, then there's going to be less of a social pressure to lead to abortions. So those are 4 things. At least 3 of those are things that every church in this country should be able to get behind. And I would argue at least most mainline Protestant churches should be able to get behind the idea of free, easy access to contraception. Because many of us do not have doctrinal things arguing against it. Some of us even have doctrinal things arguing for it. If you want to stop abortion, which pretty much everyone does, no matter what side
no matter what side you are on.
No matter what side you're on, those are the 4 things to actually do it. Not push abortions underground into unsafe and potentially deadly circumstances.
But it's much easier to just say, we're not going to have any abortions, and then the numbers show that there were 0 abortions performed in the state because no one has to report them, but you also get mothers passing away that...
Right, and so they just, in the U.S., they can at least go to other states, which is hugely inconvenient, but it's still possible.
Yeah.
But in countries where it's illegal, the doctors know, and there are just coded things that, just uncontrollable hemorrhaging, without any other explanation. Well, that just means death due to an unsafe abortion. But it just gets classified in some other way because they can't write that down. Yeah. This is an issue I've spent a lot of time with.
I think this issue may be important to you, Trey.
Well, it is. I took a class at Rollins School of Public Health called the GEMA Seminar, which is GEMA is an organization that tries to stop maternal death due to abortion. due to unsafe abortions. And so I sat in that class, and I was one of the few representatives from a faith community in that class. But even still, you walk away, the key thesis of the class is what I've been laying out here. And if you actually want to stop abortions, okay, fine. But let's do this in a way that actually stops abortions, and not do this in a way that just kills women. Because that's what's happening with unsafe abortions. It's just putting women up, exposing women to unnecessary risk of mortality.
Now, down to a more practical aspect, how do you, as a member of a faith community, drive the conversation towards the four things that you mentioned? How do you get churches to actually be on board when it's so much easier to say, we don't like abortions, abortion shouldn't happen, and then be done with that conversation?
Some of it is present the facts. And if they, I thought this through. This hasn't happened to me yet, but I thought this through. Like, what happens if a member of my congregation says, we really want to, put together this pro-life initiative? And I'll say, okay, if we want to be pro-life, let's be pro-life. But let's be pro-life in a way that's actually going to stop abortions. And I think when you explain people those in kind of a factual way, and, if I was ever going to do this for real, I'd probably get together the studies and actually be able to cite the specific authors, which I'm not able to do here off the top of my head. Which maybe I should. I'm sorry, Roger. Roger's my professor. But you just have that honest conversation of, if you want to stop abortion, here's how we do it. And let's be strategic, and let's do this faithfully in a way that honors people as whole people. Another I did some research on this, and another thing you can do is talk about the idea that our theology always allows for the possibility of sin. If you view getting abortion as a terrible sin, right? Fine, okay. But you should not create a legal framework that does not allow for that opportunity to sin. Because we're not in the business of forced conversions. And we're not in the business of forced adherence. Now, don't take that logic too far, because if you take that logic too far, it simply means that the church should never be involved in politics, and that's not what I'm saying here, even remotely. But you talk about this idea of allowing people that opportunity to be sinful, and then offering them forgiveness and support in spite of it.
Well, and that's the United Methodist social principle stand on it, is that, we think it's a very challenging thing, although we acknowledge that it's complicated, and what we pledge to do is be available for support. I do also think, and my thoughts on this, like I said before, I think another way to open conversation about, and not just this particular issue, but any of these really difficult issues, is to talk about a vision of life that is total life. And what does that look like? What is our holistic, total understanding of human life? And that gets into some other really complicated issues very quickly, but I think that that's the discourse that we need to be having in churches, is not just necessarily single issues. Not that this is not a very, very important one, and I completely agree with you, but if we believe that human life is sacred, what are the implications of that across the board?
Right. And so this is things like
healthcare
or the death penalty.
Right.
Or any number of issues that if you're going to choose life here,
you have to choose life everywhere else.
You have to choose life everywhere else.